This is Gemara Kesubos Daf Lamed Aleph. We finished off yesterday in the bottom of Lamed Amid Beis. We didn't have the Amid in front of us, so just to read the last four words: V'karishi Rayin Shel Chaveiroi, and you tore the silks of your friend, and that is how we had a case of Kimle B'Diramine. That the moment you swallowed the truma, you did a simultaneous act by ripping the silk of your friend, and therefore we discussed that we're going to have a case in that you can have a Chiyav Misa. If you look at the top Rashi will remind us where we're holding. Rashi says B'Shasha at the moment that you swallow the truma, you're a Zar Yisrael, you're not allowed to eat truma. And if a Zar eats truma, he is chayiv misa, he's chayiv kares. And Rashi explains, it's two different actions. We have misa because Yisrael you ate truma, and you have a chayiv mama, an obligation of monetary payment because you ripped the item of your friend. Miftar still your potter. Which obviously is a bit of a bigger chiddush than we saw yesterday. All the cases that we spoke about yesterday of Kim Levi Ramine is when you had a simultaneous obligation within the same entity. Within one item, you had a Chiyav Misa and a Chiyav Tashlumim. Here we're having two different items that happen simultaneously. That is the chiddush of the Gemara. And now we're going to review what we learned yesterday. Goof on the top line of Lamed Aleph. Lamed Aleph says the Gemara, Omer Rav Chisda, quoting the Brayse from yesterday, Maider Rav Nochani ben Ekana began v'chel shel chaveiroi, v'achler Rav Nochani ben Ekana admits that if someone steals the chila of the forbidden fats of his friend and he eats it, shehu chayiv, that he's obligated. Why? Shekvar nes chayiv b'gneva kodesh v'alei iser chaylev. Because when you chayiv, when you obligated to pay the person back, when you pick up the item, you make it a kinyan, you made an acquisition. When are you obligated? The iser and the chayiv misa, when you eat the chaylev, so they're not simultaneous, they're two different times. You're kind of, and you have a monetary payment the moment you pick it up, and you're only obligated to the death penalty after you eat the item. Says the Gemara, Lema Plika de Rav Avin. Let's say that what we just said from Rav Chisda explaining Rav Nochani ben Ekana is arguing on Rav Avin. What does Rav Avin say? Damar Rav Avin explains Rav Avin. This is going to harken us back 2.5 years ago to Gemara in Shabbos. If someone throws an arrow, he throws an arrow from beginning of 4 amos to end of 4 amos, which of course is an Isser Daraisa. On Shabbos he's transporting Dalit Amos, Bereshus HaRabim, an Isser Daraisa, biblical transgression. And at the same time, what happens as the arrow is flying through the air? V'kara Shirayim Balichasa, he rips straight through a silk, rips through an item of his friend as it travels. What is the halacha? Says Rav Avin, Potter. Why you potter? Because when you picked it up, that was a prerequisite for the item to fall. And therefore, even though it's in time, happening at 2 times, if we were to look at this on a slow motion, at one moment it rips through the silk, that moment you're chayiv monetary payment. When are you obligated? Means only when the arrow continues and lands the 4 amos. So seemingly this should be a case like Rav Chisda just taught us that the two should not be simultaneous. If they should not be simultaneous, we should not say Kim Le B'Dirabin, and you should be obligated both. Explains Rav Avin, no. There still is a p'tur, there's an exempt on the monetary payment. Why? Because the Akira was a Tzayrech Hanacha. So therefore, explains the Gemara, why Rav Chisda is at odds with Rav Avin. Achanami, we should be able to say the same thing. That you picked it up in order to eat it, and for the fact that Rav Chisda said no, that when you pick it up, you're kind of the item, you acquire it, and then when you eat it, that's when the Misa obligation comes. Show us he's not going with the opinion of Rav Avin. So ask the Gemara, Akasha, the Rav Chisda seemingly is at odds with the Rav Avin. Explains the Gemara, no question. There it's impossible. When it comes to Shabbos, there are 2 sides of a coin. The only way to be biblically obligated, although we'll see more examples in a moment, is if you pick up the item in order for it to uproot, in order for it to rest. However, in our case, it's possible to transgress the eating of the chumah without actually picking it up. How? What do you mean? You have to pick something up to eat it. Says the Gemara, no you don't. He could bend down and just chomp down, put his mouth straight on the floor, and eat it. So says the Gemara, there's a fundamental difference in the case of Rav Avin and our case of Rav Chisda. In the case of Rav Avin, the only way you could have a transgression of Shabbos, of carrying on Shabbos, is the only way for it to rest is you have to pick it up. The only way for it to go Daled Amos is if you throw it. That is the reason why Rav Avin allows us to view the entire entity as one time period, and even though it's really happening at 2 time periods, the first rips through the silk and then it lands, still Rav Avin allows us to view it all as one entity. But by us, it's not true. You don't have to pick it up to eat it. You could bend down and you can eat it, and therefore that is why Rav Chisda said that Rav Mechani ben Akana is maideh, that in such a case there's no Kimle in US obligated because it happens at 2 different times. Inami, another way of explaining Asami Baila Adure Lamatam Hadule. Another lumdis. Over there, when you throw the arrow, you can't pull it back. However, by us, you go back out. The fact that you picked up the item doesn't mean you have to eat it. So you picked it up and now you have a monetary payment. If you stop right now, what's the halacha? Pay the guy. Are you chayav misa? Of course not. Whereas over there, the moment you threw it, it's in motion. It doesn't stop. That moment already, it's going to certainly rip through the silk. It's going to land, and that's why we view it all as one entity. Ask the Gemara, Ma'ika, Ben Hailishta, Lahailishta, what is the difference in the 2 teruts and the 2 explanations? The Gemara just gave, explains the Gemara, Ikbeinayu, Hamavir Sakin B'Rishus Harabim, you're carrying a knife, and as you're walking in Rishus Harabim, so it's Shabbos. So Issur number 1 is what? Vikara Shirayim Balichasai, and you rip through silk as you're walking, but you're only going to be chayiv Shabbos after you finish the 4 amas. So lahach lishna, according to this lashon, namri avshalah nachab lo yakira, the first lashon, hachanami avshalah nachab lo yakira. The only way to get this knife daled amos is if you pick it up. So therefore, according to the first lashon, we view the entire thing as one entity, and therefore it's the exact same case. And in this case, we'll yes say kimle, we'll yes say that you're potter for a payment for the silk. However, lahachlish, according to the second lashon of the Gemara, da'amid lomati mahadir le, there's no way to back out. Hachi matzar mahadir le. Here, of course, you could stop as you're walking. Just stop walking. And those are the 2 different ways of explaining why the din of Rav Avin is not at odds with Rav Chisda, and it's indeed a separate case. And again, now we go gufa, we go a bit deeper into the statement of Rav Avin. So we started off the statement of Rav Chisda. We said, wait, is he arguing Rav Avin? We explained 2 reasons now. Now we say gufa, let's go a bit deeper in the statement of Rav Avin. Azayrik chayt, if someone is throwing this arrow for Amos and Shabbos, gufa Amar Avin. Amar Rabbi Avin, Azayrik chayt, mitchilas arbal, sayif arbal, v'kar shirayim belechasa, potter. Why? Sha'akira tzayir chanachehi. That was the statement of Rav Avin. Asks the Gemara, Masiv, about 20 lines down, Lamed Aleph, Aleph, the first one line is he. Masiv Rav Bibi Barabaya. Rav Bibi Barabaya asks on Rav Avin, Hagoynev Kesubos Shabbos, if someone steals a wallet on Shabbos, Chayiv, the halacha is he's obligated to pay for the money that he stole, even though he's also chayiv the death penalty for carrying on Shabbos. He's still obligated for monetary payments. Why? He's already chayiv for geneva the moment he picks up the wallet. He's now obligated. He made an acquisition. He's obligated to pay the guy. When is he chayiv misa? Only after he carries it for amos. But continues this brayso. Let's say you're dragging the wallet, so you never actually picked it up. Then megar v'yotzei potter. Then it's going to be potter. You're not going to have a monetary payment. Why? Issur Shabbos u'gneva ba'in ka'echad. Because then in that case it comes simultaneously that only when you bring it into your rishos, only when it crosses over that boundary, goes into the end zone, that's when you're chayiv the monetary payment, and as well at the same time in Issur Shabbos. Therefore it's ba'in ka'echad. It happens simultaneously. Therefore there's a patur. If you pick it up, case number 1, now you have an acquisition, you're monetary obligated, and you only chayiv misa after transporting a daled amos. So therefore you're chayav both, 2 different entities, not simultaneous. But if you're dragging it, then it is simultaneous, and then you're going to be potter. But comes along Rav Bibi Barabaya, and this is the kasha on Rav Avin. V'amai, what is the reason in this second case you're going to tell me that you are potter that happens simultaneously? Why don't we say that in case number 1, what was case number 1? You picked up the wallet. We said you have a monetary acquisition, and only afterwards are you v'chiyah misa. But 1 second, why don't we say according to Rav Avin, what was the aside he just taught us? When you throw the arrow, when you pick up something on Shabbos, the picking it up is the necessity for the transportation. So to over here, you picked up the wallet, is the necessity necessity to transport, and therefore we should be able to view the entire thing as one entity of time, and therefore there should be a ptur. So according to Rav Avin, what are we going to do with the brisa of Rav Bibi bar Abaya? Answers the Gemara, reminding us of the rules we learned together in Masechta Shabbos. You picked it up not to transport it out. You picked it up to store it, and then you decided to carry it out. So in this case, we cannot say that the hagbah, the acquisition, the picking it up, is a tzarich, is a necessity for the hanacha eventually. Because that wasn't your intention. Says the Gemara, 1 second. It's such a good answer, but in this case, there's no biblical transgression. It's true, you ended up carrying it for amos, but because you did not have that in das, you did not have the mindset when you picked it up, there's no obligation. Well, how do we know that? And the first white line, his own is cleaning out his objects, little spring cleaning from one corner to the next, and then he changes his mind, he ends up carrying it outside, potter. Even though you transported from Rosh Yachid, your house, to Rosh Rabbim, even though you carried Dalet Amos, you're still potter. There's no biblical transgression. Why? That wasn't your intent. And the only time there's a biblical transgression is when you picked it up with that das. You have to have the entire thing with one act of transgression in order to carry it out. So says the Gemara, in our case, if your original das was not to carry it out, there's no Isser Daraisa. Explains the Gemara, 2 lines to the bottom of the oven. That's not the case. You took it out, you picked it up, and your kavana, your intent is carry it out. So says the Gemara, now what's the case over here? The case over here, the reason why you're going to be chayiv is kisha amad, you stood still. While you're in your house, you stopped carrying it, and that's when you're going to have the acquisition, you're going to be chayiv ganev, but only afterwards you end up carrying it out. So it's true, your das was eventually to carry it out, but you split it up by stopping mid-flight. That when you throw the silk, like we saw a moment ago, you throw the arrow through the silk, there you can't pull it back. There we also say that the akira is a tzarich hanacha. But over here, because you stopped, and you indeed did stop, therefore it's not considered one big entity. But says the Gemara, 1 second, let's go and tell Shabbos a little bit. Let's remind ourselves. Why did you stop? If you stop just to adjust the load on your shoulder, or chayu, that's the normal way, and it does not split up the action. Stopping to adjust something is a continuation of the action. You stop to rest, and that's going to be the case. But says the Gemara, 1 second. But what would have been the case if you stopped to adjust on your shoulder? As we turn over to Lamed Aleph from a base potter, you would be exempt. But now we have a problem going back into the brayso that we quoted on the bottom of Rabbi Barabai and the bottom of Lamed Aleph from an Aleph. Now we have a question. Aditani, what was that sefer? There were 2 cases in the brayso. Case A was you picked it up, you acquired it. Case B, you dragged it, and that's when there was a simultaneous acquisition. But says the Gemara, why did it say case B? The sefer Yamagar v'Yotze Potter. It should have went within the first case itself. We know that we always prefer the Mishnais and Braisos. Don't introduce secondary cases, but rather take the same case, split it into 2, and teach us the same din. So ask the Gemara, Niflik v'nisna b'didei b'med dvarim amurim. When do we say in case number 1? When you picked up the item that you're cutting it, you made an acquisition, you have a monetary payment. Only afterwards you have a chiyuv Shabbos. That's when you pause to chill, you pause to rest. But if you pause in order to readjust it, then you're potter. Why? Because then we view the entire act as one entity. The fact that you paused is irrelevant. You're just adjusting it on your shoulder, and then you're going to be potter because you view the hagbah in order for the eventual hanacha. It's all one large action. You should be potter. So why did the brayso say a second case of migarer v'yotze? You should have differentiated within the same case itself. Therefore, says the Gemara, you're right. Ella, going all the way back, reinterpreting the brayso of Rabbi Bar Avin. Hamani ben Hazahi damar mahalech ka'imi dami. The famous sheet of Ben Hazahi, the Ben Hazahi holds that any time you walk, every step, as Rashi points out, is its own akira, its own uprooting, and its own putting it down. And that's the reason why the first moment you pick up an item, you make a kinyan. And that is when you have the monetary acquisition of the chiyuv geneva that you stole. But the chiyuv misa, when are you obligated? The death penalty is only the last step when you fully transport it. Dalet amos, that's going to be the case of Rabbi Bar Ovin. But I asked the Gemara 1 second. Aval Zayrik, my very good. You're explaining the price. The case of the price is like Benazi that you stop. But Nazi holds that even as you walk, each step is as if you stop. But what would have the halacha been if you threw the item? What would the halacha been butter? It would have been butter. So I asked the Gemara the same question. If like the Brisa should have said, what did the Brisa say? It said case A you pick it up, case B you dragged it. Why? Say both within picking it up. Say if you're walking, that's when there's a chiyav avul zarik. But if you threw it butter, you're going to be butter. Explains the Gemara. You know why the Brisa and the Sefer said the case of dragging megarer v'yoytzei tzrichel. There's a special chiddush there. Sal kedaitach amina. I would have thought there would have been a hava mina ein derech oitzah b'kach. It's not the normal way of transporting an item by dragging, and therefore we had a hava mina that you would not to be chayiv. Kamash Malah, and that's why it specifically spoke of that case. It teaches the Chiddush that there is an Isser Daraisa, which would by default come along and simultaneously create an Isser Geneva, which means you're going to be potter for the monetary payment because it all happens at the same time. Says the Gemara, Geval the Kishmak. So what's the case? You dragged it out. But what's the case? Ubemai. If it's a large purse, that's the normal way to drag it. If it's a little purse, it's not normal, therefore you should not be chayiv because you didn't do a normal action. Ela b'mitzi, you're talking about a medium size purse. Says Mar, okay, medium sized purse, you're dragging it out. Where did you drag it to? What do we say? Remember we spoke out, we said that as you cross over the threshold, as you get into that end zone, we said that's when it happens simultaneously, the acquisition on the item and the chiyav misa. But says the Gemara, 1 second, where are you dragging it to? If you're dragging it l'Rosh Hashanah, you're right, you're over Nisr Shabbos, but it's a Gneva Leka, you never acquired the item. Why did you never acquire the item? Says Rashi, you know why? Because Mishicha, without picking it up, dragging, without picking up the item right now, we're going with the opinion that holds there's no kinyan, there's no acquisition. The only way to acquire the item is if you pick it up. So says the Gemara, if you drag it into another Rosh Hashanah, you never acquire the item. And furthermore, so what are you going to tell me? You dragged it to your own house. It's a Geneva Ika. You're right, you're called stealing. But it's a Shabbos Leka. Where is the Isser of Shabbos? You went from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. As we remember, if we learned extensively back in Gemara, Shabbos, it's forbidden. But only the Rabbanan. The Isser Daraisa is not. There's only an Isser Daraisa to go from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. But now one Rosh Hashanah private domain to the next. So what is the case of the Braisa of Meshicha with this medium-sized purse that there's going to be both an Isser Daraisa of carrying of Shabbos and an Isser Daraban and an Isser of stealing? And therefore we're going to say the biblical commandment, the Isser Daraisa, the death penalty of Shabbos, overrides the monetary payment. Explains the Gemara. You know what the case is. You took it over to the side of Rosh Hashanah. Come on. Says the Gemara, what's the case? If you hold at the sides of Rosh Hashanah, the place that the people walk to get out of the way of the wagons, according to Rav Eliezer, that is a regular din of Rosh Hashanah. So we're back to square one. Isser Shabbos Iko, you never acquired the item. Then Isser Geneva Iko. So you're right, you acquired it. It's like Rosh Hashanah. Isser Shabbos Leka, there's no Isser Daraisa. So again, what is the case when you drag it that you're both going to have an Isser Daraisa, Chiyam Misa of carrying, and a biblical and a monetary payment which should be exempt from the Eilam? Rav Eliezer explains the Gemara about 20 lines down. Laman Aleph Amud Beis, the first one line is Shabbos, explains the Gemara. We're going through Rav Eliezer. We're going through Rav Eliezer, who just taught us a moment ago that Siddur Rosh Hashanah is Rosh Hashanah v'chiyam. Rav Eliezer Rosh Hashanah damu. When does he hold that those sides have a dinner Rosh Hashanah? It's not immediately in chiyuva de Shabbos. You know why? It's only to obligate you because the zimnin de dachki rabbim. There's sometimes that there's so much traffic in the street, and the rabbim itself goes up on the sidewalks. So it's teaching you a chiddush that the sides of a dinner Rosh Hashanah to obligate you. But he still holds that you can actually make an acquisition on those side areas, meaning he only holds the Shasarabim l'chomra. My time because Lamaisa there's not that many people there. So it's an in-between level according to Eliezer. You're able to make an acquisition. It's like Rosh Hashanah, but you're over Nisa Daraisa l'chomra. That's the way to explain the Braisa. Rav Ashi Amar. Again, we're trying to explain what is this case of Meshicha that we found that there's going to be a simultaneous Nisa Daraisa monetary compensation that will be exempt due to the B'chiyah Misa Daraisa. Says Rav Ashi, the case that you took your hand and you put it within 3 tvachim to the ground, the kibloy, and then you accepted the item kiderava damarava yadu shaladim chashuvlo k'arba l'arba. Your hand at its own rishos, and therefore if you drag it and then you put it into your hand, that's considered like you went from Rishos Rabim to Rishos HaYachid of your hand. You can have an Issa Daraisa of carrying on Shabbos as well as the Issa of stealing, and that's going to be the Kimlei B'Dirabinei, the simultaneous acquisition and Chiyav Misa, you'll be exempt from payment. Explains the Gemara, third terrace, Rav Acha Masni Hachi. That's what Rav Acha said. But Ravina Masni had a different way of learning. Lo'ilam Davka Rishos Rabim. Says Ravina, really, you took out this wild Rishos Rabim? But what was our problem? Rishos Rabim Nami Kani. We asked, well, where's the Kenyan? Meshicha dragging Rishos Rabim, you're not Kainis. Where are you Kain over here? Says Ravina, Rishos Rabim Nami Kani. Obetarvayu, Obediyukadam Asisika Mifligin. Ravina and the first terrace are both really discussing Rav Acha and Ravina and how they're trying to explain this brisa of dragging the wallet, or really coming off the same diak in the Mishnah. The Tanan, what did the Mishnah say? You're dragging out the item, umeis v'rishus ha'baylim, umeis. If he's trying to pull out the animal, and then the animal dies while it's in the owner's rishos, potter. He is potter to pay for the animal. Hey, if he picked it up, or you already brought it out of the rishos, that's the Mishnah. So both Ravina and Rav Acha, the two ways of learning this brisa, either like Ravina, that the Rav Acha, that the case is you put your hand within 3, or like Ravina, that the case is that you brought it to Rishos Rabim, but you're able to make a kidney in Rishos Rabim. They're learning this Mishnah. Ravina daik mi reish, Rav Acha daik mi seifa. Now the Gemara explains. Ravina daik mi reish, ayamoish chaviyatzu meis Rishos Rabim potter. Why did the Brisa say that if it dies in the owner's Rishos, there's an exemption? Time of the meis Rishos Bailim. Oh, you see him Rishos Bailim meis chayiv. You brought it to Rishos Rabim. Ravina holds you made an acquisition. This the source says Ravina that you could acquire something in Rishos Rabim, so you can have that the same moment that you have a Chiyah Misa, you carried it 4 amos, is going to be a monetary issue that you're a kind of item and therefore going to be potter. Rav Acha daik mi seifa higbio sheisiu. It says you picked it up and you brought it out, and therefore from there we learn out hoitza dum yadagba mahagba dasler shusay. When you pick something up, it comes into your rishos. Avotza nami dasler shusa. So now says the Gemara, the classical kasha machlekes Ravina and Rav Acha both stemming from the same source. Rav Acha kasha reish, Ravina kasha seifa. How does each one learn the other part of the Bryce? Why not? Comes us there shoes just buy them Karina Bay, because he learns as long as it doesn't come into just it's as if it's just buy them. Save the Ravina like Kasha. He doesn't hold of that dia. He doesn't hold it carrying it out. It's like picking it up. That are the two ways of learning the end of this Bryce. This Bryce of Mashcha, you Mashcha v'Yitzio, the end of the Bryce of Rav Avin of Amid Aleph. That if you're dragging it and taking it out, then in that case it's going to be a Chiyuv Mis. At the same time, that's going to be a monetary compensation. The Pshat of Ravina, the Pshat of Rav Acha, both coming from the same Mishnah. We'll pick it up from the next case of the Mishnah and the next Shir Amir Tzasha.